Hello everyone. Today I will tell you one of the most shocking stories in American literature. This story is not only an emotional portrayal of the lives of slaves before the American Civil War, but also a powerful condemnation of the institution of slavery, which existed in American society for centuries. The story revolves around the life of a loyal and virtuous slave, Uncle Tom, who endured the brutality of the slave system yet held steadfast in his faith in God and love. From the South, where slaves were exploited and treated with cruelty, to characters like Eliza, a brave mother determined to escape with her young child, and Simon Legree, the cruel and heartless master. All of these elements form a picture of profound tragedy, yet one also filled with hope. In the early days of the Shelby household, Uncle Tom was a slave beloved and respected by everyone in the family. He was the epitome of loyalty and devotion, always working diligently without a word of complaint. Every morning, he woke up early to prepare breakfast for the family and took care of the Shelby children with genuine love and affection. He treated them as his own children, teaching them lessons of virtue and faith in God. Though he was treated as property, Uncle Tom did not feel sorrow, for the love and care from the Shelby family were the most precious things in his life. Uncle Tom was not only a caretaker but also the spiritual pillar of the family. Whenever Mr. Shelby faced difficulties or Mrs. Shelby felt anxious, Uncle Tom was always there to comfort and encourage them with kind and loving words. The relationship between Uncle Tom and the Shelby family transcended the boundaries of master and slave, becoming a deeply humane connection. His sacrifices were boundless. He was willing to do anything to protect and care for this family, for he understood that this was the home where he had lived and been loved. However, everything changed when the Shelby family faced financial difficulties. One day, Uncle Tom was called to Mr. Shelby's office, where his master sat with his head bowed, his face heavy with the burden of debt. Despite his deep affection for Uncle Tom, Mr. Shelby had no choice but to sell him to pay off the unmanageable debts. The moment of parting was one of the most painful in Uncle Tom's life. As he was called out to leave for his new master, the Shelby children ran to hug him, speechless except for the silent tears that flowed. Uncle Tom looked at Mr. Shelby with a sad, compassionate gaze. "I understand, Master. I will always remember you and your family," he whispered, though his heart was filled with sorrow. He bore no ill will toward his master, knowing that Mr. Shelby was a good man, bound by the constraints of society and circumstance. Mr. Shelby lowered his head, unable to look at him, for he knew that this separation would leave a wound that would never heal in Uncle Tom's life. When Uncle Tom met Simon Legree, his new master, a chilling and cruel atmosphere enveloped him. Legree was a tall man, with a fierce face, eyes full of malice and indifference. His treatment of the slaves was in stark contrast to the Shelby family. Instead of treating them with love or regard as human beings, Legree viewed the slaves merely as mindless labor tools, to be tormented until they were exhausted, with no remorse. As Uncle Tom stepped into Legree's estate, he immediately sensed the coldness of the place. The air seemed thick with the muffled cries of slaves being beaten and mistreated. The silence, filled with tension, made Uncle Tom feel as though he had entered a hellish place. Yet, Uncle Tom did not lose faith in God. He continued to pray silently, hoping that he would protect him and help him overcome the challenges that lay ahead. On his first day working on Legree's farm, Uncle Tom was tasked with grueling labor, with no time for rest. The constant work, combined with the cold indifference of the other slaves, deepened his awareness of the brutality of the system he was enduring. Each passing day was a spiritual battle, where Uncle Tom had to reconcile his faith in God with the harshness of his new life. He began to realize that, here, no one cared about the feelings or dignity of the slaves. Beatings were a frequent occurrence, and Legree's words were always filled with challenges and insults. Once, when Uncle Tom was unable to complete a task as Legree had demanded, Legree flew into a rage and ordered him to be beaten immediately. Despite the excruciating pain, Uncle Tom did not fall. Though his body was battered, he kept his faith in God's salvation. His words to Legree, "I will not abandon God. I will not let you take my soul," angered the cruel man but also made him understand that Uncle Tom was not easily subdued. Uncle Tom not only had to fight against physical pain, but also against the fear that lurked within him. On one hand, he could not believe that his life had fallen into the hands of a master like Legree. But on the other, he feared for the other slaves on the plantation, especially the women and children. Every night, he woke in loneliness and despair. But then he would find strength in his prayers. "Lord, please help me. Please be a light to those around me," he would whisper in the darkness. When Uncle Tom was taken away, Mr. Shelby's final words echoed in the heavy air of their farewell. "I can do no more. Tom, God will protect you." These were the painful words of a master who had done everything he could but still could not save the slave he cherished as a family member. Though his heart was filled with sorrow, Uncle Tom did not protest. He silently looked back at the Shelby family one last time, the children he had cared for and loved as his own, the masters he had devotedly served for so many years. He could not say anything, only tears of sorrow filled his eyes. But in his heart, his faith in God remained unwavering. "God will protect me," he whispered in his heart, knowing that the life ahead would be full of trials and suffering. Though sold like an object, Uncle Tom did not let his heart be filled with hatred. He believed that every challenge in life had a reason, and perhaps this was the trial that God had set for him. The Bible verses he had read, the teachings on patience, forgiveness, and love, all seemed to have deeply penetrated his soul. He thought about the words of Christ, "Blessed are those who suffer, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." He vowed to keep his faith strong, despite everything that was happening to him. When Uncle Tom arrived in the South and began working for Simon Legree, he immediately noticed the vast difference between the life he had known and the cruelty his new master imposed. Legree's farm was a cold, gloomy place where light seemed unable to pierce the dark clouds that hung over it. The slaves there lived in harsh conditions and endured constant abuse, with no hope of a brighter future. Uncle Tom not only had to work tirelessly all day long but also suffered physical mistreatment and mental abuse from Legree. This master was not just inhumane but also extremely cruel, always seeking ways to torment the bodies and souls of the slaves under his control. Despite enduring countless hardships, Uncle Tom never stopped praying or hoping for salvation. He saw the despair in the eyes of the other slaves, who had lost all faith in life, in freedom, and in themselves. But not Uncle Tom. In his heart, his faith in God burned brightly, and nothing could shake it. One day, as he stood in the fields, his back bent under the harsh sun, his hands drenched in sweat, Uncle Tom thought about freedom. What was freedom? It was liberation from the chains of bondage, the ability to live in peace and happiness without being beaten or treated cruelly. But he knew freedom was not something easily attained, especially in a society where the system of slavery was so deeply entrenched. Nevertheless, he held on to the hope that one day, justice would prevail. One day, while working on the farm, Uncle Tom met Eliza, a determined slave woman who was trying to escape with her young child. Eliza was a loving mother, willing to do anything to protect her child from the cruelty of their masters. And she was determined to escape from the torment of Simon Legree. The meeting between Uncle Tom and Eliza was not just a coincidence, but a turning point in the story, where two suffering souls met and shared their hopes and dreams of freedom. With his kind heart and deep compassion, Uncle Tom encouraged Eliza and her daughter. Although he could not do much to help, he shared words of faith and perseverance with her. "God will guide you on the right path," he said, with a warm gaze. "No matter where you go, never lose your faith. Prayer will help you overcome everything." Eliza felt the sincerity in Uncle Tom's words. She felt a renewed strength, a comfort in her soul as she was consoled by his kindness. While Eliza courageously faced the challenges of seeking freedom for herself and her daughter, Uncle Tom was also fighting against the harsh life at Legree's farm. The bond between Uncle Tom and Eliza became a symbol of humanity, courage, and sacrifice among the slaves in a society filled with injustice. Though Uncle Tom could not help Eliza escape immediately, his care and encouragement made her even more determined. "I will do everything to save my child," Eliza told Uncle Tom, her eyes filled with resolve. "Nothing can stop me, knowing that someone still believes in me and prays for me." The life under Simon Legree's rule was beyond anything a human could imagine, let alone a life Uncle Tom had known. Legree was not just a cruel and inhumane master, he was the embodiment of infinite brutality. For him, slaves were mere tools to serve his purposes. Nothing more. The whippings that Legree inflicted on Uncle Tom were not just physical violence. They were attacks on Tom's soul and spirit. Uncle Tom had once been a strong man, full of faith in God and the value of human life. But under the relentless oppression of Legree, these beliefs were put to the test. Every day, Tom faced not only the physical violence of whips but also the verbal abuse and degradation. Each beating felt like his soul was being torn apart. Yet Tom refused to let the pain dominate his heart. One time, after a brutal whipping, when Tom lay on the ground, his body limp and broken, he lifted his eyes to meet the hateful gaze of Legree. In that moment, with the strength that only someone with unwavering faith could possess, Uncle Tom said, "I will not forsake God. I will not let you take my soul." Those words were not just a defiance against the cruel master before him, but a declaration of the unshakable strength of his faith. However, in the darkest hours, when there was no one to comfort him, Tom could not help but feel an overwhelming loneliness. Each beating, each moment of torture, made him question how much longer he could endure. Could his body and mind withstand such a cruel world? He wondered if God had abandoned him or if he was part of a trial that even he could not fully understand. Yet, just as despair began to creep into his thoughts, Tom found solace in the Bible verses he had learned throughout his life. The teachings of love, forgiveness, and patience through trials were an endless source of strength that kept him going. Every time he recalled the words of Christ, he felt a new wave of power fill his being, as if God's words were the light guiding him through the darkness. While enduring his abuse, Tom often thought of the Shelby family, the people he had once cared for and loved as his own. Despite the physical and emotional pain, he always kept in his heart the image of the Shelby children, the ones he had nurtured and protected. Above all, Tom thought of his own child, the one he had to leave behind when he was sold. His love for his family and his child became the driving force that kept him alive during the darkest moments. The beatings, the physical and mental torment might weaken Tom's body, but they could not diminish his belief in salvation. Every time his wounds healed, every time his strength returned, he felt closer to the salvation promised by God. He knew that no matter how much pain he had to endure, he would never forsake his faith. God is always with me, Uncle Tom thought, even though I must face all the suffering the world has to offer. I know God will not leave me alone. One day, I will be free, and when that day comes, I will be reunited with those I love. While Uncle Tom endured the brutal oppression under Simon Legree's hand, another woman, Eliza, was fighting her own, no less arduous battle. A battle not only for herself but also for the love she bore for her child. Eliza, though a slave like so many others, possessed a latent strength that the institution of slavery could never diminish, the strength of motherhood. When all hope seemed shattered and there appeared to be no way out, she made the boldest decision of her life, to escape the cruelty of Legree and seek freedom. On a dark night, when no one was watching, Eliza quietly took her young child in her arms and left the plantation. Every step she took was laden with intense fear, fear of being discovered, fear of being hunted down, fear that she would lose both her life and the life of her precious child. But despite all that, Eliza's resolve never wavered. The moment she crossed the frozen river, cradling her child against her chest, was charged with raw emotion. The river, a symbol of the immense challenges she had to face, was both a boundary to freedom and the dividing line between life and death. Every step in the freezing water, every biting gust of wind, was a terrifying trial for Eliza. Holding her child close, she refused to allow herself to stop. Her eyes never dared to look down at her feet sinking in the icy waters, but instead focused on the path ahead, the path that led to freedom, the path that held hope. Though the frozen river was cruel, and the road ahead was uncertain, Eliza continued forward, determined to reach the other side. The moment Eliza crossed the frozen river was not just a physical crossing of nature's obstacle, it was a fight against herself. It was a powerful act of defiance against the institution of slavery, against those who viewed human beings as mere tools for exploitation. It was the act of a mother willing to do anything to protect her child, even at the cost of her own life. Throughout her escape, Eliza was not alone. Despite the cruelty and prejudice surrounding her society, she encountered kind-hearted individuals, people who were willing to help her. even though few dared to stand against the institution of slavery. It was these individuals who gave her hope, and each person who aided her became a testament to the courage and strength of love. These good-hearted people, living in a world filled with hatred and division, found ways to act and rescue a mother and her child. They were the proof of the light still flickering in a darkened world. Eliza's emotions changed gradually throughout her journey. At first, there was fear and doubt, like a wave that kept crashing endlessly. But over time, hope began to ignite within her, becoming the flame that guided her journey. She was not just running away, she was fighting for the right to live. To be a mother, to be free from a powerless woman under oppression. Eliza transformed into a model of resilience, strength, and love. The death of Uncle Tom was not an end, but a beginning, a wave of change in society's consciousness about the institution of slavery. Though Uncle Tom no longer walked among the living, his steadfastness and loyalty created a shining light that illuminated dark and clouded souls. His death sparked a great debate about freedom and human dignity. Every story about him, every heroic act he performed, not only moved hearts but also ignited the flame of the struggle for freedom. Uncle Tom's story became a symbol of sacrifice and human endurance in the fight against cruelty and injustice. It was through his death that the stark contrast between two worlds became evident, one of oppression and one of humanistic values, where individuals, even under oppression, have the right to maintain their dignity and belief in goodness. Those who witnessed Uncle Tom's sacrifice, or who had heard his story, could not help but feel a shift in how they saw the world, especially regarding the enslaved and their basic human rights. The emotional wave and the fight for freedom left behind by Uncle Tom did not stop within the confines of his own story. He became a powerful source of inspiration for the abolitionist movements that followed. The oppressed, those who had lived under the system of slavery, began to realize that they deserved a life of freedom and the right to demand respect for their dignity. Uncle Tom's death, though tragic, served as a wake-up call to the oppressors, reminding them that cruelty and injustice could not last forever. His story also forced those who supported slavery to confront the system they had been defending. It was irrefutable proof of the injustice and cruelty of slavery. Those who had seen slaves as property, who had believed that slaves were merely tools for labor, were forced to face an undeniable truth. Uncle Tom, with all his courage and faith, showed that every human being has the right to freedom and to live with dignity. The death of Uncle Tom was not just the death of an individual, it was the death of a system that could not endure. It symbolized the ongoing struggle of humanity to reclaim freedom and dignity. From that death, waves of change began to spread, not just across America, but to all places where discrimination and oppression existed. The fight for human rights, for freedom, and for equality, driven by Uncle Tom's legacy, became an essential part of the journey toward a more just society.